resolved my obstructive sleep apnea, and recently ran my first half marathon. But this isn't really a story about losing weight. It's a story about gaining my life back and discovering that my world could become bigger again. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your world had become smaller? Sometimes it happens because of weight, illness, pain, injury, anxiety, depression, or simply getting older. Whatever the reason, most of us know or can imagine what it's like when life starts revolving around what you can no longer comfortably do. For me, it happened because of my health while still in my 30s. It wasn't my formal type 2 diabetes diagnosis. It wasn't the blood pressure medications. It wasn't having to hunt for 5X t-shirts or 4X shorts just to wear in public. Those things mattered, they should have concerned me, but they weren't the moment that changed me. The truth is, my world had been getting smaller for years. I went from loving to fly and travel to slowly avoiding it whenever possible. If I had to absolutely fly for work, I carried a seatbelt extender so I wouldn't have to ask for one in front of other passengers. I went from enjoying spending time with others and being in pictures to avoiding being seen altogether. The exception was my daughter when she was little. I wanted pictures with her. Even then, I often wasn't comfortable being in them. Looking back, I had gradually accommodated a growing number of limitations. I spent a surprising amount of mental bandwidth and emotional energy adjusting my life around them. One by one, they didn't seem like much, but together, they were making my world smaller. The fewest awkward situations, the fewest reminders of what I can no longer comfortably do. And perhaps hardest of all, it was becoming more difficult to be the father and husband I wanted to be. What I've come to realize is that limitations rarely only affect one person. My limitations weren't just shaping my life, they were shaping my family's life too. And then came the moment I couldn't ignore. At 39 years old, I needed assistance putting on my own socks and shoes. Even when I did it myself, I would be breathing hard and drenched in sweat afterward. That moment bothered me. Not because of how I looked, because of what it meant. It wasn't really about socks. It was unavoidable evidence that my world had become very small. And perhaps the hardest part was knowing I had been in a similar place before. Over a decade earlier, I had lost 150 pounds, going from roughly 350 down to about 200, eating a keto or very low-carb diet. I maintained that loss for about 2 years. From the outside, it looked like a success story, and in many ways it was. But underneath, I was working very hard to stay there. Every week revolved around a cheat meal. I thought successful weight maintenance meant constantly negotiating with food cravings. The funny thing is that I genuinely enjoyed the foods I ate the rest of the week. The problem wasn't that my normal meals tasted bad. The problem was that the cheat meals were specifically designed to be irresistible. They were engineered to be hyper-palatable in a way that everyday whole foods simply aren't. As a result, the cheat meal often became the highlight of my week. I spent time craving it beforehand while also dieting and exercising harder to overcome it afterward. At the time, I thought this was what moderation looked like. Part of me believed that successful weight maintenance was supposed to include occasional indulgences so that what I was doing wouldn't seem extreme either to myself or to others. Over time, I realized something important about myself. For certain foods, especially processed carbohydrate-rich foods, I wasn't someone who could eat 1 or 2 slices of pizza and happily leave the rest of the box alone. For me, 1 slice or 1 serving was often too much and never enough at the same time. What I had been calling moderation was really a constant negotiation. And I eventually learned that constantly negotiating with those foods was far more difficult than simply choosing not to eat them. The one meal occupied far more mental real estate than I wanted it to. Eventually life got busy, the cycle became harder to maintain. Eventually one cheat meal became a cheat day, a cheat week, and so on. And little by little, the weight returned. I learned that I couldn't simply out-exercise an approach to eating that required constant negotiation. For years, I viewed that as a personal failure. Looking back, I see it differently. That experience taught me that losing weight and sustaining weight loss are not always the same thing. More importantly, it taught me that if I was going to succeed long term, I needed a way of eating that felt sustainable for me, not something I was constantly trying to escape from. Fast forward a decade in 2021, and I found myself in a place I never expected to be again. The weight had come back, and then some. This time, I was over 400 pounds. This time I had type 2 diabetes. This time I was taking multiple blood pressure medications. And this time I needed help putting on my own socks and shoes. I didn't have a grand plan. I simply knew that keto had worked better for me than anything else I had tried before. So I started with simple substitutions. If a meal normally came with bread, I left it off. A sandwich became a lettuce wrap, a burger lost the bun, rice became rice cauliflower or broccoli, traditional tortillas became lower carb alternatives. I wasn't trying to be perfect, I wasn't trying to become carnivore overnight. I was simply looking for opportunities to replace some of the foods that had gotten me into trouble with alternatives that better supported my goals. Those small changes gave me momentum. I didn't have everything figured out from the beginning, but this time I made one major change. There would be no weekly cheat meal. After some time, I realized that removing the cheat meal didn't make the process harder. It actually made it simpler. I spent less time negotiating with myself, less time anticipating the reward, less time recovering from it. What surprised me was how those changes compounded over time. Consistency and curiosity turned out to be powerful teachers. Each small experiment taught me something, each refinement built on the last, and many of the biggest benefits weren't immediate. There were second and third order effects that only became obvious after weeks and months of consistency. The cravings gradually lost their grip on me. Foods that once seemed irresistible stopped occupying so much space in my mind. The foods I used to view as rewards no longer held the same sway they once had. Before, my days often felt like cycles of peaks and valleys. I'd have bursts of energy followed by dips that left me tired, distracted, irritable, and thinking about my next meal. But the longer I stayed consistent, the more my energy stabilized. The highs and lows became much less dramatic. I stopped spending so much mental energy chasing the next boost, and eventually I realized something. The reward wasn't waiting at the end of the week. The reward was the stable energy I experienced throughout the day. The reward was feeling a little bit better each day. The reward was becoming healthier than the day before. But perhaps most importantly, the reward was also becoming aware of these benefits I had previously taken for granted. As those benefits accumulated day after day, I began to appreciate them more. The ability to move comfortably, more consistent energy, better sleep, less time thinking about food, feeling physically capable. Those things had become so normal in my earlier life that I barely noticed them when they were present. It wasn't until I experienced their absence that I learned to fully recognize their value. The reward wasn't a single meal. The reward was experiencing, recognizing, and appreciating those benefits every single day. As my relationship with food changed, my relationship with movement changed too. I stopped viewing food as primarily entertainment or reward and started viewing it as nourishment that supported the life I wanted to build. And when that happened, exercise stopped feeling like punishment. It stopped being something I used to compensate for my eating choices. Instead, movement became an investment in my health, my capabilities, and my future. As time went on, my eating became even simpler. What started out as a ketogenic diet gradually evolved through a series of mini self-experiments and refinements into what many people would call a carnivore diet. Today, most of what I eat is meat and eggs. I didn't arrive there because I was trying to follow a trend. I arrived there because, for me, simplicity turned out to be sustainable. Over time, I realized that success wasn't about finding more willpower. It was about building a way of living that required less willpower, less discipline, and less mental bandwidth to maintain. The fewer decisions I had to make about food, the easier it became to stay consistent. And the more consistent I became, the better my health became. My type 2 diabetes went into remission, my blood pressure normalized, my obstructive sleep apnea resolved. Under medical supervision, conditions that had once required multiple medications eventually required none. At the same time, I found myself moving more and more. For the past 2 years, I've averaged roughly 15 to 20,000 steps per day. Not because I'm forcing myself to exercise or move constantly, but because life itself became easier to participate in. The more capable I felt, the more I wanted to move. And the more I moved, the larger my world became. In fact, just 2 months ago on my 43rd birthday, I trained for and ran the Indy Mini Marathon. A few years ago, I needed help putting on my socks and shoes. Now I was running 13.1 miles through downtown Indianapolis in under 2.5 hours. The number on the scale mattered, but what mattered even more was how much larger my world had become. For the first time in years, my body no longer felt like a limitation. It felt like an opportunity. As my health improved, something else happened too. My family's world became bigger too. My wife has also gone through her own health transformation, and together we set a bucket list goal of visiting every national park in the United States. Not long ago, the three of us, my wife and my daughter, traveled to Disneyland together. Those experiences might sound ordinary, but just a few years earlier, they would have felt much less accessible to me. I'm also able to show up in ways that matter every day. I prepare many of our family's meals. I've been able to chaperone my daughter's elementary school field trips. I have the energy and capability to be present for the people I love. When my world became bigger, theirs did too. And that's something I never fully appreciated when I started this journey. Whether the biggest changes wasn't physical, it was my relationship with movement itself. Once exercise stopped feeling like punishment for my eating choices, movement became something entirely different. Movement became a way to expand my life, not because every day became extraordinary. Most days are actually pretty ordinary. I sometimes think of this extra capacity as an energy lottery dividend, and these dividends didn't come from caffeine. They came from stable energy, better health, and having more physical and mental reserve available each day. It wasn't just about having the physical capability to do more. It was also about having the mental and emotional capacity to show up differently. With more stable energy, fewer food negotiations occupying my mind, and more physical capability and reserve, I found myself more patient, more present, and better able to respond calmly to everyday stresses. I had more capacity to reduce friction instead of adding to it, to listen instead of react, to help instead of withdraw. In ways both big and small, I became more available to my family. Years earlier, many of those things felt more difficult than they should have. Looking back, what strikes me now is that I was only in my 30s. I had accepted a level of effort and limitation that simply felt normal at the time. What surprised me was that it wasn't just that I became physically more capable of doing more. My relationship with effort changed as well. For years, it felt like my body was constantly pushing back against life. I could still do many of the things that needed to be done. I still went to work. I still took care of my responsibilities. I still showed up for my family. But doing those things often required a tremendous amount of willpower. Every day felt like a negotiation. Every task carried a little bit more resistance, a little more friction, a little bit more effort than it should have. Today, it feels like the opposite. Instead of my body pushing back against life, it feels like it's pushing me toward it. Instead of resisting movement, it often feels like it's encouraging action. Tasks that once felt like burdens became opportunities. I find myself more willing to take on projects, walk a little farther, say yes instead of no. As my world expanded, I found myself able to invest more of my time and energy in serving the people I love and living more consistently with my values. In a way, improved health didn't just give me more years, it gave me more capacity to spend those years in service to the people and things I value most. People sometimes ask me whether I miss certain foods, and the honest answer is that occasionally I do. When people hear that I eat mostly meat and eggs, they often assume I must feel deprived. What surprises them is that I don't spend much time thinking about when I'm not eating. I'm usually too busy enjoying the life and opportunities that weren't available to me before. For a long time, I thought freedom meant being able to eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. Looking back, I realized I was measuring the wrong kind of freedom. What I really wanted wasn't more food freedom. What I wanted was more life freedom. The freedom to move, the freedom to travel, the freedom to help others, the freedom to fully engage in my life and the lives of the people I love. And perhaps most importantly, the freedom to become the best father and husband I could be. Nothing tastes as good as life freedom feels. Not because food doesn't taste good, it does. But the sensation only lasts a few minutes. Life freedom lasts much longer. The scale matters, health markers matter, weight loss matters. But over time, I stopped treating those numbers as a verdict or a moral judgment. They became information, not an assessment of my worth. The more important question for me became this: what kind of life is this helping me build? Because the greatest gift wasn't the weight I lost, it was the life I gained. And not just for me, for my family too. My world became bigger, and in many ways, theirs did too. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this: Don't just pay attention to the number on the scale. Pay attention to the life you're building along the way. For years, I thought the most important question was whether I had food freedom. Looking back, the more important question was whether I had more life freedom. Was my world becoming smaller or was it becoming bigger? That's the question that ultimately mattered most to me. Because the goal isn't just adding years to your life, it's adding life to your years. Thank you.